Hey fellow golfers, I wanted to do something different this time and present some key data obtained from Arcos from 2022 covering scratch players globally, over 11.5 million rounds and 540 million shots, and compare those averages and that data to the average on the Pro Tours. I think you will find it illuminating, although some of it obvious, but might give you a yardstick to compare with your game and identify areas where you want to focus on, and perhaps use some apps or GPS or other devices that now exist to look at strokes gained for yourself. So let's start with hitting the fairway from the tee. On average, the scratch players hit the fairway about 50%. On the tour, the average is 75%. Approach greens in regulation. The average for scratch players is 58%. For the tour, it's 73%. Sand saves. Scratch players 30%. The average on the tour is 45%. Putts, 3 to 5 foot putts. Scratch players 76%. Average on the tour 87%. 10 to 15 foot putts. Average scratch 17. Pros 30. Let us move to some data that looks at the scratch player versus the average on the tour versus the best on the tour last year in that particular category. Quite interesting. And I'll be playing some clips of most of those players, the best ones, as we go along through this clip, as well as presenting the data, of course, in more precise detail. I will round up the numbers, percentages for sake of what I'm verbally conveying, but you'll see the exact figures up above. So 3 putts per round. The number of 3 putts per round on average for scratch players is 1.3. The average on the tour is 0.54. The very best last year, Taylor Gooch, was 0.27. The average number of 1 putts per round, scratch players 5.2. The average on the tour was 7.04, and the best last year, Lucas Herbert, 8.09. The average total putts per round for scratch players is 30.7, on the tour 29.06, and not surprisingly, last year on the tour, Lucas Herbert was 29.7 putts per round. The average greens in regulation percentage for scratch players 56, for average on tour in the order of 65.5. The best last year, Scotty Scheffler, in the order of 72%. Let's look at driving distance in yards, total distance. The average scratch players, perhaps surprisingly last year, was 259 yards. For the tour, it's in the order of 299 yards, and the best last year, Cameron Champ, was 321 yards. Driving accuracy, really important. Scratch players 51% on average. Average on the tour, order of 60%, and the best last year happened to be Ryan Armour at 73%. Let's look at the average number of birdies per round, quite interesting. For scratch players, it's 2.2. For the average on tour, about 3.6, and the best last year, Cameron Smith, 4.6. The number of bogeys per round. Scratch players, 4.6. Average on tour, 2.7. Sanjay Im last year, 2. 2 bogeys on average per round. Amazing. Let's then look at averages for par 3s, par 4s and par 5s. Quite illuminating. So for scratch players it's 3.1. For the average on tour 3.07. And the best last year, Taylor Gooch and Luke Donald, was 2.96 on par 3s. The par 4 average, 4.2 for scratch players, 4.04 for the tour, and 3.9 for Xander Schauffele, the best on the tour last year. Let's look at par 5 averages. 4.7 for scratch players, very close to the tour average of 4.64, and the best 4.41 was Patrick Cantlay last year. So I hope some of this data helps you see where scratch players focus quite well, like on the par 5s, relative to the average on tour. Clearly pros drive the ball further, hit more on the fairway, have more greens and regulations, have more sand saves, hit fewer putts. Not surprising. But some of the variations vary according to the category, and you can see where scratch players come close. Now, if you collect data for yourself from various apps that are out there now that are worth looking at, or GPS devices, and look at your strokes gained, or look at areas of the game where your statistics perhaps are far lower than even the scratch player, then that might be an area of the game, be it putting, be it short shots off the green, sand saves, that you can then focus on more and improve not only your results, but of course as a consequence, the enjoyment of the game too. I will come on to another clip soon to look at some data on driving, and including things like the angle of attack and what that means for your driver settings in terms of degree of loft, as well as some advice from the great Bernard Langer for senior golfers, especially when it comes to how do you compensate for loss of distance as a senior golfer, and instead of chasing distance, what are the areas of the game to focus on to give you an equivalent competitive basis, as he has done over 16 seasons on the Champions Tour with 46 wins, 12 of which were senior major champion wins. See you on the flip side. Happy golfing.